one.
Welcome back, everybody. It's two guys, and there's a stack of comics over there behind me. And so, you know, if you tuned in over there, there's Reed, and I'm Mike.
You know,
And we are just talking comics like we always do. Today, we wanted to talk about, we did a video already on what we would do to save DC Comics. So today, two DC fans are going to tell you what we think we should do, what Marvel Comics needs to do to save itself.
yeah,
And I will start off by saying I think this Ultimate universe that's coming out is a great way to start. The
yeah,
Ultimate Spider-Man, the Ultimate Black Panther.
yeah. I think for Marvel, what's interesting is I actually think Marvel and DC kind of have the opposite problems right now. And when we say save the universe, is what we clearly mean on this is like obviously they're still the biggest two names in comics, but their sales are down. It's down across the board. Interest is down. Manga has far surpassed comics at this point. And so kind of what would we do to get folks in there? I think one thing we said for DC that I think would be true for Marvel, I think you've got to stop having the shuffling in the creative teams. You've got to start getting where you lock people in for books. And so like before you even launch a book, you guarantee a writer and an artist are on the book for 12 issues at least or
12
something like
issues.
that.
Yeah.
You got to give me a year of content. And I think the thing is the consistency to that I think would make up any money that they'd have to pay extra to get that consistency. And that what I will say, the number one thing that has made me drop Marvel comic books, DC, because of character loyalty, I don't drop as much. But Marvel, I will more buy for, hey, this run is really good, right? There's only a handful of Marvel characters I'm going to buy no matter what. But if I see like a Moon Knight comic book that has a consistent writer and a great artist, I'll probably pick up the entirety of that run. But I've had more than a few Marvel comics where you get four great issues drawn incredibly well, and then the next two issues look like an elementary school kid drew them. And it's like, yeah, man, no, I don't love the characters enough for me to continue buying that much. So I think it's a problem for both Marvel and DC, but I think specifically Marvel, because they have so many characters, I would have, we're like, hey, we're not launching a Black Panther run or an Iron Fist or a Luke Cage run unless we get a writer and an artist who can clearly lay out, here's our 12 issue plan at least, and we're committed for every single issue.
Yeah, I think for both the big two right now, there is a little bit of a strain on the talent pool.
Mhm.
Um, and although they do have some really good creators, both, um, I I love the idea, and we keep coming back to this in several videos. Is the artist writer team just really, they have to have a feel for the character and they got to love it, and then you got to give them a little leg room to stretch. I mean, comic books are not, at least the way the big two are designed, are not really designed the way that the indies come out. Like it's a 6 book run, and I think you see a lot of the big two doing that. I would I would love to see Marvel commit. You know, like how long did that Moon Knight run go?
Well, I mean, I think it's still going 30 issues, and like I've maintained it because they at least, but that's the only one. Like where I will say I started Thor. Thor changed artist after 6 issues. I hated the new artist. Iron Man, I read, and then it kept changing the artist, and it lost me after about 8 to 10 issues. Captain America's done this to me all the time, and I've ended up dropping because the writers end up hating Steve Rogers, but I end up dropping because the art drops. I would say what's interesting is I'm always any Marvel character that I kind of have any affinity for. I'm in for an issue number one. I'll pick it up, and you can earn me as a reader. But so many of them lose me by like issue 3 or 4 because it's like 4 issues in, and we're already at a filler issue with a backup artist. Like four issues, like you didn't even get through the first trade.
Like
Uh,
what happens? Like you can't tell from one book to the next. They look like two different comics sometimes.
yeah,
I mean, the trade dress is the same, but you open up the pages where the meat of the
it isn't.
story
Yeah,
is,
it's just not
and
there.
you're like, yeah, yeah.
I think the other thing that I would do, I think opposite than DC. I think DC should make fewer books. I think Marvel should make more. Now, I think the thing with Marvel is you got to cancel some. You don't need 50 X-Men books. What I would say with
Thank you.
Marvel,
I'm like,
Silver Surfer should have an ongoing comic book. Luke Cage and Iron Fist should have an ongoing comic book.
That would be
Punisher should
cool.
always have an ongoing comic book. There's so many good characters at Marvel who just go on the bench for such a long time. And like I say this, Silver Surfer is one of my 10 favorite comic book characters. I am always going to pick Silver Surfer up when I see it on the rack. They relaunch and cancel his book, and it's so inconsistent, and there's no tonal consistency to it because you can never really dig into the story. Because like it'll be 6 issues, and then 10 months later, it's another 6 issue thing that has absolutely nothing to do with what came before.
And it's
And
not
it
really
kills momentum.
fair because it's not really fair to the title because you got fans out there that are going to buy it.
Hmm.
But when you change artists after issue 3, issue 6, and you put that writer on something else and switch them around, it changes. The comics weren't designed for that,
Yeah,
and
I mean, a huge appeal of comics is the episodic format in terms of it's a continuing adventure. I mean, if we're honest about superhero books, in a lot of ways, it's kind of soap operas for guys. I mean, like that's and I'm not
yeah,
saying all guys read, but I mean, good, anybody
yeah,
who's a comic fan, it's a different form of soap operas that typically has a different audience than the traditional soap opera fan.
yeah.
And the thing is, like, that episodic nature has always been something that's going. It's so weird to me. Is like, I can go back and Marvel does a great job releasing these like epic collections that are like 15, 20 issues. And I probably have like 8 or 9 Silver Surfer ones. And it's so cool to read those and go back and you can see like there's this consistent story arc for like 30 years of the Silver Surfer, where the events of the previous issue connect to the next one. And now I'd say the last 6 Silver Surfer issues, I don't even find any connective tissue between the stories other than like, well, Norrin Rad is the Silver Surfer, and that's about it. And like the weirdest thing they did the last couple of years, they did a 6 issue series. I think it was called Silver Surfer Legacy or something like that. And it was set a story set in the 90s. And then they did another series called, I think, Silver Surfer Ghostlight that was set in the modern era. And then 6 months later, they did another one that was set in the 90s again. And I'm like, so you guys can't even do like 12 consecutive issues of a 90s throwback. And so I just think there's so many characters like Silver Surfer, Iron Man, Iron Fist, um, Power Man, Luke Cage that go on the bench for so long. Jessica Jones is another one I think that could sustain a book. Like there's so many characters in Marvel because their depth is so much broader than DC's that I think if they were willing to, I mean, you should never go and see that Punisher doesn't have a book, right? Like he should always have a book coming out from Marvel. And I think if they get rid of some of these duplicate titles, like 50 million X-Men books, and give some of these other characters solo ones, I think it would actually really benefit them. And that what was always appealing to me as a Marvel fan in the 90s, like as someone like DC, but Marvel was always interesting. It seemed like everybody had a solo book. And those books didn't go 6 issues. Those books
Yeah.
were on 13, 25, 37 issues. I mean, I think in the 90s, like Quasar had a 50 issue comic book. Quicksilver had like a 40 issue series, I think. You look now and it's like, it's stunning. The one that was weird is they did a reboot of The Punisher. That went 12 issues. It was awful. And then they decided we're going to make a new character, The Punisher, and that's ending after 4 issues. And it's like, how do you expect to get any kind of pull behind you when you're canceling it so frequently? So
Some
I think
loyalty and yeah,
Marvel
I
for
think,
sure should use some more books for characters who just don't have it.
and you got to wonder what the sales numbers are doing. Is it that bad? So it's a little bit of the chicken or the egg. What came first? Like, is it because they get the sales report for the third issue and they just cancel it? Or is it that like that someone has a really great idea? Let's pull that team and we'll put them on Wolverine, and
Yeah.
so then that book gets trashed for, and then it ends up canceling. I don't know. There's got to be a consistency to it.
Well, I think sometimes they need to take short-term losses for long-term gains, and I think comics always do that really weird. In that, like, one of the best books that I read this year, and I mean, it fizzled out at the end. The first couple issues are good. They did a book called Uncanny Spider-Man, which was Nightcrawler finally getting like his own book. It was really good. Did 5 issues, but then it's over. It's done, and he's no longer that role. He's not going to be called that anymore. And the book was basically mutants are on the run. Nightcrawler's trying to hide and still be a hero. And so Spider-Man gives him one of his backup costumes and is like, hey, since there's so many different Spider-Man people running around, I might as well give you a costume. You can say you're a spider hero and you can still make a difference and help people. And it had a pretty intriguing plot and it makes some interesting things in there. 5 issues. By the time I finished, I'm like, oh, cool, this is good. This is kind of a cool status quo. It's over. And now he's no longer the uncanny Spider-Man. Nightcrawler's back to being Nightcrawler, and he's back to being an obscure character who's barely in anything in any comics. And it's like, if you're going to go through the trouble of launching a book, giving a rebrand, giving him a new costume, you can't end it in 5 issues. You've got to give it some time to develop. And that, especially because these comics are 3 issues that you have to order 3 months in advance. You can't really tell if a book's been a hit or not by the time it airs issue 5. And I'll say for me personally, as a hardcore comic fan, there's so many books I won't even start if I know it's ending in 6 issues with the big two. Because it's like, by the time I get into it, it's going to be done, and they're probably never going to follow up on it. And you kind of,
That's me too. Um, so yeah, we have two Marvels on our sub list now. We've got Black Panther and Spider-Man, the Ultimate ones.
mhm.
And it's rare that we pick them up, but those two seem to be really strong. And
I
so,
think you touched on another thing that I think is helping
but
Marvel.
then you wonder, like when I put those on my sub list, I'm like, it's gonna be what is it gonna be 6 issues?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hopefully there's long-term plans. But
yeah.
I think DC's or Marvel's a little worse than DC in terms of not giving books creative license to go for a while. I think,
Give them some leg room. Let them stretch out a little bit.
yeah, for sure. I think lastly, I think like you mentioned, I think like the stuff like this Ultimate Universe and things like that might be a good way forward. In that DC to me has way too much multiverse right now. I think Marvel could, and as much as I'm hesitant in saying this, I do think multiverse might be okay for Marvel. In that DC to me has relied on it way too much. It has way too many, like there's 15 different Batmans running around. And I think Spider-Man, unfortunately, has had a little too much of it.
I was gonna say that's a pet peeve of yours.
So it's
27
very hard for
Spider-Man.
me to say add more multiverse. What I will say, what these Ultimate comics are showing, I think sometimes these characters just have so much baggage behind them that I do think kind of approaching it in a fresh way. And I think there's a little bit of creative leg room behind it, that you could sustain an Ultimate Universe, like a separate one. Now, I think the key with this is what they're doing with Ultimate Universe. I think they could turn this eventually into a 10 or 15 book line. But there's been smart starting with 3. But I think the thing is, there's so many characters who just get bogged down by decades of bad storytelling and with so many classic elements removed that I think it's an interesting refresh. In that, one character I've really gotten into because of the movies, Iron Man, his comics so hard to pick up because there's so many convoluted and stupid things that have happened to Tony Stark where it just strains credulity.
I'm the same thing. I'm the
No.
same way with Thor. I mean, I
Yeah.
was an avid Thor reader. Thor was on my pull list for years. I haven't had bought a Thor book in 5 years.
Yeah. And so I have reservations in saying that, but I do think, and Marvel, it's not that Marvel hasn't used multiverse, they have. But I think if they commit to it and structure it a little bit, if they're willing to go, we're going to have an Ultimate Universe, and it is just the Ultimate Universe. Ultimate Universe is not coming to crossover with the main Marvel Universe anytime soon. It is Ultimate Universe, and it is on its own. I think that could work. I think you could do other events like Old Man Logan, comics set in that universe. And they did that for a while. They did well and they continued. They ran it into the ground a bit. But I think if you put a little more talent behind it, a little more thought, a little more structure, and gave it something where people know it's going to stick around. I think that's the other hard part is sometimes you'll see these line launches happen, but it just you're like you can look at it and you're like they don't really see it's got a no-name creative team, not a big artist. It's only scheduled for a 6 issue miniseries. Like this isn't going anywhere. I
I
think
think that's
that's
killing them.
what they need to get to.
Yeah, if they could stick the flag in the ground and say, okay, we're going to go forward with this, I think the readers would flock to it. Right now, there's just so many titles out there, and you don't know what's gonna, stick, what's gonna be good, and it's driven us away. So yeah, I would say Ultimate
I
has
think you could. I think
potential.
you could get 2 to 3 different timelines that they could maintain, and there's enough good characters. I think you could sustain that. So I think more solo books for more characters who go on the bench for too long. Maybe a little bit more multiverse. Last thing I would say, no matter it's the ultimate line, the main line, or whatever universe, please stop telling hero versus hero stories. If I gotta watch one more Civil War, Spider-Man's fighting the Fantastic Four, the Avengers versus the X-Men, Tony and Cap are fighting each other, just bench that for a bit. Bench it for like a decade. Have everybody kind of just be heroes. Set up some great villains. Tell some great villain stories. Stop going for Civil War 2 and all this. They just like they literally had a Civil War 2. I'm like, again, guys, like stop pitting the X-Men against the other heroes in the universe.
Yeah,
Stop having manufactured conflicts with the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. Like, just
that
have them be
that
on the same side for a bit.
yeah, you got to get your writers to think of something fresh, and the readers will be there for it.
Mhm.
The readers will be there for it if it's fresh. You
So,
don't want any retreads.
and then I think the other big sin Marvel's had, stop relaunching books. Get a series and let it go 50 issues. Like if you're gonna have the Avengers around, I mean, like this, Avengers is always going to be around. There's always gonna be Avengers comic. Stop relaunching it every 12 issues. Stop relaunching it like every 8 issues.
The new Avengers.
Yeah, like if you relaunch it, sure, start with the #1, but let that #1 run for like 75 to 100 issues, and then you can do your classic Marvel. It's Legacy issue 900 and charges $10 for 80 pages or whatever. Like that's what they're
Yeah,
gonna do.
yeah.
But they just got to stop with the renumbering. Like if you're gonna launch a new #1, keep it a new #1 for like a decade. Don't do new #1 and then we're gonna relaunch it the new #1.
2 years later, another one.
Now
Yeah,
we've hit issue 750. We're gonna go back to original numbering. Oh, 10 issues later, new #1. Like just get a little bit of consistency to it. And then I think sometimes Marvel, I think even more so than DC, is so concerned with the temporary bump of a #1 issue that I think it's short-term gains that have long-term losses. And that I know a ton of people where it's like the comic store people I'm friends with where it's like, I read the run, it ended at issue 30 and they rebranded it as someone else. And it's like, man, like I was collecting that run. I'm not gonna start
yeah,
another new #1. I just
yeah.
that kind of ends. And so I think just a little bit more tonal consistency and maybe like a dash more multiverse, like a dash.
Just a dash of
Like just
multiverse. Yeah,
maybe a
I
little
got
bit.
you. I got you.
Like the complete opposite of DC, where like I never want to see more multiverse of stuff from DC, but I think Marvel might be able to do some interesting things.
They can pull it off. We'll
But let
see.
us know what you think below. What do you think Marvel could do to save themselves? I think Marvel and DC are in a similar predicament, but have very different solutions to fix their problems, in my opinion. But let us know what you think. Always interested to read your comments. If there's what you say, if you agree, disagree. Again, me and Michael never pretend we're the absolute authorities on these things. Always open to getting our arguments refuted if we're wrong.
We're
So
just two guys with a stack of comics. That's all we are.
thank you as always for watching. We'll catch you in our next video.
Bye.